Welcome everyone to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio. I'm Tim Grady. I am here with Lou Weiss, who is the founder of Manufacturing Talk Radio and also president of All Metals and Forge Group. They manufacture open die forgings and seamless rolled rings for industrial uses and machinery building. If you're looking for that kind of forging, check them out at steelforge.com. Joining us today is Norbert Ore. Norbert is our senior correspondent on global purchasing manager indexes. He looks at 18 different ones across the globe and some regional ones in the U.S. Always glad to have you with us, Norbert. You're always sharing great information. Thanks.
Pleasure to be with you as always. And certainly this month we've got an interesting story to talk about what's going on with the global PMIs.
And then some.
And then it's going to get more interesting next month. But what's the picture look like this month?
Right. Well, each month, our ability to forecast is being limited more and more each month, simply because so much is in the hands of so many people that it's questionable whether or not they should be the ones making some of the decisions and so on from that.
Well said.
No doubt. So what's our, as I call them, the flock of starlings doing this month? Which direction are they headed, or are they all over the place?
Well, they're basically dispersing because they're getting more variability into the system. If you take, for instance, the Chicago index has been consistently above 65, and it fell down 9 points to 56. So what happened? What changed that much? That is a 20% month over month difference.
Right.
And so, as we look and try to figure out why we get that much change, some of the others, the Chinese, two surveys, one's at 50.2 and one's at 50.4. So there's absolutely no real change in the Chinese economy month over month. They have had a lot more problems than they've divulged, which is always the case. But the reality is, when COVID came through, China shut down many of its plants completely, as we did in things like the meat industry. We did some of the same thing. So those startups have been in China have been very slow to come back. The people have, when they went home, they stayed home. And so we see a big difference there in how they responded versus how some of the other countries responded to that, which caused a lot of problems from that.
Norbert, if you don't mind, can we go back to the beginning, the Chicago? I mean, to me, that sounds like that's a crisis. What happened there? I mean, everybody wants to know about China and Russia and Ukraine, but what happened in Chicago?
Well, one of the problems I have with the Chicago survey is that it's 65% manufacturing and 35% services. Right. So was that big a drop split among them, or was it one of the surveys, one side of the survey, either manufacturing or services, did it dominate? Does that mean the whole manufacturing area in Chicago fell through? I don't think so. I think it's probably the services sector that slowed, because that's where the employment issues are. And we're seeing employment fall, et cetera, and that makes a big difference in the data.
Well, I'm not glad to hear that services took a fall, but the last our primary business, All Metals and Forge Group, for the last 3-4 months has been growing by leaps and bounds. And the manufacturing report by the Institute of Supply Management also shows that there's significant holding and growing patterns in manufacturing. So when I hear a 20% drop in Chicago, I'm like, I want to go to the bank and take my money out.
Well, I'm sure you need to wait at least one more month, Lou, before you do
Okay.
that. Yeah,
All right, I'll do that.
to get in there. But
Why don't we talk about Europe, because that's where all of the unfortunate action is at the moment. And it's only been 15 days, so we're not really getting a full picture. So I want to get an idea of where they are now, maybe where you think they're going to be in a month. And then in a month, when we chat with you, we'll see if this war has caused a significant impact on the purchasing managers.
right. And we'll see how much that really picks up, Tim, in that data, how much has really changed, because the changes that we see don't necessarily happen in as big as Chicago, obviously. We're measuring change, so we like to see the change in there, but it's also hard to assign all of that change just to to what's going on in Chicago. I used to count on Milwaukee to support that, but they've had a struggle with their survey and haven't gotten it out as consistently, so it's been hard to use. But there is a consistency in the data between 55 and 60. If you look at ISM, manufacturing's at 58.6, non-man's at 56.5. You look at Canada's 56.6. The Eurozone's 58.2. Within the Eurozone, you've got Greece at 57.8, France at 57.2, Ireland at 57.8. So everything's clustered, as you like to look at the scattergram, Tim. Everything's clustered around those that are growing are, a change from an index of 56, for instance, 55 represents a 10% month-over-month change
Improvement.
in the data. So that's a big change in any data set that you're looking at. So we have to look at that and say US is doing well, Europe is doing well. The Eurozone itself came in at 58.2. So that's their composite of all of that. Then we see Canada doing well. Mexico is still struggling, which we expect. So I'm pretty happy with the numbers that I see. The first thing I look at is what's happening to new orders. And what is happening to new orders is new orders are solidifying. They're holding up very well. We had a number of indices that had new orders in the 60s. And so new orders is going to drive next month's production, right?
Sure.
And so, like I say, I feel very good about that. We'll be concerned about our ability to sustain it, but certainly not unhappy with what we see in the data right now.
Russia's not looking too good right now on so many counts. At 48.6, plus their whole army is in mid-Europe.
Right. I'm not sure I understand all of the economics coming out of Russia, because they have apparently the ability to take their currency, their food supply, everything else, and stretch it tremendously, because they've got to be getting hurt around this from having shut down production facilities. There's a lot that a lot of pain that they're inflicting upon themselves. Certainly not what they're inflicting upon the Ukraine, but there still is a lot that they are inflicting on themselves.
Well, they want to go back to the way it was during the Great Empire,
Right.
where everybody starved except for the rich and famous.
Exactly. So
I don't know if they're going to simply work their workers and let them drop over and replace them with other workers. I don't know. Did they really experience the level of shutdowns? Do we know with any certainty that the rest of the world did?
we really don't know. You know, there's so little that comes out, so little that's combined. I'm sure the people in the central office get numbers and so on, but they don't share any of that to speak of. And if they did, we wouldn't believe it anyway. So
The New York Times this morning came out with an article that they shut down their main auto manufacturing company due to lack of supply chain and so on and so forth. I forgot the name of the company. It starts with an L.
right.
Probably LYXQ. But they shut down, and not
I think you're searching for Lotta, probably.
There you go. We can count on you
to do that. A number of years ago, we had an exchange student from Russia spend a month with us and with my family, and got to know him quite well. And he always would say, if you own a Lotta, you'll never see the sun. And the whole idea was you're going to be under it working on it so much.
That sounds like a Jaguar.
But anyway, they have their they have their crosses to bear. You know,
Norbert,
I don't think they can. I don't think they can run the way they operate. I don't think they can add all of this land and to their ownership, if you will, of the region. I understand the issue about the ports. That plays a big role in it. I'm not sure that's the whole story, though. I think it's convenient. They're going to tell you whatever they can, try to get you to believe. So we'll see.
Norbert, I'm just curious about everything south of our border, the U.S., all the way down through Central America and South America. How is that whole region doing?
Collectively, they're okay. Let's see, Brazil was at 54.7 this month, Lou. And that was up from 47.8. So there's another large jump. And this time in the favor of Brazil to be better. So the region, you know, seems to be okay. I worry about sending envoys to Colombia and Venezuela, other parts of Nicaragua, I think is on that list, to try to buy oil. You know, I didn't realize all the years I spent as a purchasing manager that we were basically rocket scientists and nobody knew it.
Well,
Because,
you had to certainly juggle a lot of balls to make things work.
yeah, well, that's for sure. But the reality is, we got a lot of people making decisions around energy that really don't understand, as an energy buyer, for 40 years, I learned early on that I wasn't buying oil, I wasn't buying coal, I wasn't buying bark, which is a fuel source. I wasn't buying nuclear. What I was buying, it was BTUs. And you have to break it down that way, is the broader category of what you're buying, to really understand. I want to have access to all of those, because at different times, the market favors different solutions and different products. And so a lot of times the market would shift for natural gas. All I'd have to do is turn the valve, and not quite that simple, but we turn the valve and we could be burning 6 oil and be very competitive in doing that. Or we, in some instances, could burn number 2 oil and benefit from that. So we have this idea that we can focus on one form of energy and protect ourselves long term, and that's not really the case.
So what's going to happen with oil at the pricing that it's at? I mean, it was up to 120. I think it's about a little bit over 100 a barrel now. Where's it going?
Well, it's going to get bounced around pretty good, Lou. One of the things about oil is oil can always find a market. If we cut them off and say, well, we're not buying from them, they'll sell it to somebody else who sells to somebody else who actually sells to us. Oil will always find a buyer because it's transportable. A lot of ships, when the Middle East was supplying much of the globe and so on, a ship would come out of the Middle East and they wouldn't have a buyer for it until they were halfway across the ocean, because it's whoever puts the biggest value on it, how long they want to wait to get a contract in place to make sure they've got a place for delivery and not have to move it around too much. I think that's what's going to happen now. We're not going to accomplish a lot with the movement of oil, or with taking oil off the market, because it's going to find its way. Somebody who we do business with is going to buy more of it. Back in the 70s, which I know you guys aren't old enough to remember, but
what?
What? Well, it's the glasses. They have an improvement ability. I just squeeze them a little bit, they fog up, and so. But back during that period of time, we weren't supposed to have ships coming in and so on, embargo. So they would take and send it outside the 10-mile limit and bring it back in. So now it was imported oil from somewhere else, and the papers and everything go with it. And that's the story. That's the history of embargoes, whether they're oil or anything else, any commodity. You guys know commodities. The commodity is going to find its home.
Yes, no doubt.
Theoretically, you're correct, Norbert. But I'd like to introduce another commodity, being that it's so close to my heart in the metals world, and I presume that you're aware of what's going on with the LME and nickel pricing.
Yes. Yes.
Which went from on December 9th last year from $12,000 a ton to 2 days ago on March 8th. It went to $92,000 a ton, and they have suspended trading in nickel. As of this morning, they're still not trading it.
Right.
So is it speculators, or is it all of a sudden everybody's hot for nickel, or, you know, what's the story there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, obviously you have a different demand picture, you know. I have a certain closeness to nickel because I was raised just about 2 miles from the largest nickel plant in North America. And so International Nickel was in
West Virginia.
you know, and used to that. The problem here is there's, you know, economists talk about elasticity. How much elasticity is there in the supply? How much flexibility, how much, and so we got through a period of time where we just, we were taking out of the inventory and reducing the inventory because we couldn't produce it fast enough and so on. And I think we hit that point where the inventory itself is so low, and it's going to have to play some catch up. You know, the cure for high prices, well, you know, we also, economists also talk about demand destruction. That what was $12,000 a ton goes to $92,000 a ton. That's going to eliminate 80 to 90% of the buyers.
Right.
That just can't stay in the game at that price. So I think that's what we're going to see. And all of this is going to take a while to balance out. It's going to happen to oil prices, aluminum, you know. I've always followed Alcoa in the aluminum market, and they've gone from wondering if what their future is to where they are looking at expansion and looking at investment, and just change their whole world. And you know, their money is in aircraft quality aluminum. It's not the bulk commodity, it's the aircraft product.
The point that you mentioned about that they're at $92,000 a ton, there aren't going to be many buyers buying.
Right.
However, All Metals and Forge Group over the last 10 days has probably sold more nickel product than we have in the last 2 years.
Right.
And there are some people who are hung out to dry. They don't have a choice. They've got to buy it, which means that they're passing the price on to other people. In some cases, the U.S. government. U.S. government, you need nickel. You need it for automotive. You need, which is one of the primary elements that go into automotive batteries.
Right.
So there are some people that are, you know, stuck with this situation as it exists now.
Yeah, and maybe at $12,000 a ton, it was underpriced.
That could be.
Okay, so maybe the real market is around $30,000 a ton, not 90,000. So it's got to find its level.
Right.
And at a point that they can charge for it as a component of what they're selling, and still stay in business from that. So, you know, that's why we see all of these changes that are taking place and shortages. You know, I still have to say, I went to the grocery store with my wife, and I was amazed. There is a huge shortage of Rice Krispies.
That's serious stuff.
And so you can't get it, a box of it, but what you can get is a little 6-ounce cup. That's enough for breakfast, and that's $7. So you have to really be into Rice Krispie treats in order to justify it.
Well, we now know where your heart is at.
That's right.
Norbert, as we wrap this up, I'd just like to get your insights on fuel prices at the pump. 2 years ago, when Trump was in office, we were a net positive producer of oil. We were exporting. We had as much oil as we could consume, so we were selling off what we didn't need. Now we don't seem to have as much oil. What changed? I mean, we went through COVID, driving stopped virtually. We were consuming less oil, yet it seems to be a commodity that's up in price, hitting the consumer, and I don't understand.
Well, demand is a little bit stronger, as we've come out of all of the shutdowns and everything else that we've picked up, and it's gotten stronger. We also, as soon as the new administration came in, they stopped work on the Keystone pipeline, which that was a signal that things aren't going to be any better in the future than they are right now when it comes to supply. And so people started to think differently about supply and what they could do with that. The whole market is shifted, Tim, from the standpoint you have to. I know a number of people who have recently bought diesel trucks, diesel pickups.
Yeah,
They've got a surprise.
They really got a shock. They were doing it because they could save all kinds of money with diesel, and that's not turned out to be the case for that.
I'd like to share with you something that was on the New York Times this morning, a photograph of a gas station, I'm not sure where, showing $6.99 for regular gas.
Right.
That's probably California.
It's probably California.
What I don't understand, Norbert, is the Keystone pipeline.
Let me give you a real quick insight into convenience store economics. Okay.
Is this another Rice Krispie story?
Yeah. The convenience store prices gasoline based on what they had to pay for it at the refinery in order to load it on the tanker to go to deliver to the convenience store. That works fine. Well, in this environment, it's going to cost the convenience store more money to replace what they just sold. And so they've got to raise prices in order to cover that. So what looks like, well, they ought to be happy getting higher prices. They're going to the bank to borrow money to pay for these additional loads of fuel at new prices that they come. Now, the good news is when those prices come down, and they eventually will in some pattern, at that point, the convenience store gets their money back because they're getting more money back than what they need in order to cover the cost of the product for doing that. That whole thing has to play out. That cycle has to play out where they get to the top and they quit buying, or they they put those yellow bags on the gas pump that we all know means we're not going to get any gasoline here. But that's the basic fundamental economics that have to apply to those segments of the economy in terms of replacement. And then you get the big convenience store groups. They're going to even have to go further to borrow more money to keep their liquidity where they need to be.
Well, yellow still works for me. So.
Right.
And we're not going to stand down at the gas pump and scare people off. But Norbert, we
Right.
appreciate you joining us on this episode and sharing your insights based on the Global Purchasing Managers Index. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, as always. Take care and have a great weekend coming up.
Thanks again, Norbert. And we'll talk with Norbert again next month to see what has happened, particularly with Purchasing Managers Index numbers in Europe. And while you are surfing the web, just seeing what's happening in the world, stop by jacketmediaco.com, where you will find this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio and all of the other podcasts that we do every month. Lots of great information there. And thanks for listening to us.
By the way, one thing before we leave, we do have some new shows coming up. And so they'll be starting next week or so. So you got to tune in. It's I want to surprise you all, so we're not going to tell you who. But we have a well-known guy who's been around a long time. He knows everything that there is to know about reshoring. So if you're into reshoring, tune in next week.
That's our new episode. And thanks for listening to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio.
Bye all.